All right, and we are live. Gotta go to Twitch. All right, Dr. Rance, can I get another audio test from you?
All right, how's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Coming in loud and clear. I'm coming in with an echo. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay. Testing. Okay, perfect. I believe I still have a little bit of echo.
Yeah, there is still a slight echo.
All right. We're just trying to figure out audio, everybody. Give us 1 second here. Yes and yes, Ava. She's helping on the other side of this. I don't know where this echo is coming from. I'm sorry about that. I thought I had this figured out already. All right. Is the echo too overbearing?
No, it's reasonable.
Okay. We might have to do it with it. Ava, can you let me know if is the echo too much on the live stream? In the chat, please. Also, by the way, Dr. Rings, your baby say hi.
Okay, great.
You can't hear echo, but it's frozen. Okay, I know what caused that. I can redo that. I'm sorry, you guys. This is the first time we're using Zoom doing this.
Okay.
Yeah, I can fix that. Dr. Rand, can you just like move a little bit for me?
No.
Okay. That worked perfectly. All right, let's get started here. So good morning, everyone on the West Coast. If you're over, I don't know what to tell you. I am here today with the Honorable Dr. Johnnie E. Rain the Third. You can say hello.
Hello, everyone. Good
So,
afternoon to the East Coast, and as he said, good morning to the West.
So we can go ahead and get started here. Do you have any requests before we get started?
No, I'm here.
All right, I love to hear it. So we have someone saying morning doctor and someone else saying good morning.
Okay.
So Dr. Rains, we're gonna get started here. So my first question to you to just start off is the United States of America has always been an interesting place when it comes to the treatment of African American individuals. What are some things, if any, that still shock you today when they are talked about today? Sorry, in regards to the treatment of the African American community.
Well, things that are shocking or concerning, and you've heard this from me many times when you were in our program at Locke.
Mhm.
And so I got to start with just the term African American. To me, that's concerning and shocking. If I travel to any other nation on this planet, I'm called an American. I'm considered an American everywhere, in every nation, in every country, except my own. That's probably the most concerning and the most shocking. That, as I said, I can go anywhere in the world and be an American except in my own country. And, along with that, one of the fundamental cornerstones of the movement was that we are American citizens. And we wanted to be afforded all of the rights, privileges, and everything that goes with that was described in the founding documents. It's concerning that that's still at issue, and that probably the most all-encompassing one that's still shocking and concerning is the idea that the atrocities past and present aren't considered to be real. It's, people don't believe that those things happened and those things are still happening. That obviously is concerning on many, many fronts, that I have to justify my dissatisfaction. Wow. I basically just, in simple terms, understanding that the people, or the indigenous people, are the only ones that were here when all the rest of us got here. So we're all, I think Martin said it, Dr. King said, something to the effect of, we came on different ships, but we're all in the same boat. Sure. I can still hear you fine. Just I can hear you.
All right, I should be being okay. Dr. Ranch, can I get a test from you now?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Cool. I think I'm back in. Okay, so
Okay.
sorry about that,
Let me
everybody.
let me just kind of go back to that a little of that last question.
Mm,
What can all folks on the North American continent do to kind of take down some of the barriers based on ethnicity and what have you, is understanding that when you hyphenate
mm,
vis-a-vis African American, Asian American, you build the wall right there.
mm,
That's when you identify yourself as American slash American, you're saying in my mind that, okay, I am a different type of American than the other types of Americans,
mm.
and that if you when you build that divisiveness into the foundation, the result has to be separatism.
Yeah, yeah. There's no combating that, right? As long as everyone is going to project their differences in a way that entails um, divisiveness, as in I'm blank this and not
Right.
that, then it's just going to continue. But in I guess a follow up question to that point is doesn't that create a sense of a hierarchy already between these different individuals, which can create some form of racism since I am considered to be an African American or an Asian American or etc. American? Can that create some type of different barriers between race and as you already stated it does, but even further into the realm of racism almost?
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely a huge contributing factor,
Mm,
and we'll talk, I'm sure, a little later in some of the other questions about the whole premise and the whole idea of racism.
mm,
You know, can those can those members of non-majority ethnicities actually be racist
mm.
in the true definition of the word?
All right. So I love that. That moves us to question two here. So question two is, as a civil rights activist, you experienced many historical events. Did you ever think that one of those events would be the United States Capitol being breached by white supremacists? Is that something that ever crossed your mind will happen?
Yes. Simple answer, yes.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at being realistic, remember many of the founding fathers, those folks that were in the room creating this experiment in democracy, were owners,
Mm,
which I'm certainly is to be a slave owner, you pretty much have to be a white or some type of supremacist, or you wouldn't think you could own other humans.
mm,
And even those who weren't slave owners were all members of an elitist class,
mm,
and that when they wrote down words like "we the people" and "all are created equal," they were talking about the people that were in that room.
Mm.
They weren't even including all white people. They
Mm.
were talking about the people that were in that room. So to see that move to the direction where the breaching of the Capitol took place, it wasn't something that I thought of every day, but it was never anything that I thought would never happen. Because when the foundation of the country basically says certain people are inherently better than other people,
Mm.
and when those people feel that things are getting out of line, certainly we're going to see that kind of activity as a result.
Oh wow. That never really comes up, when you're thinking about the United States in general and our free democracy and how everything works, the amount of money we spend on our military. So to follow that question, I guess, is do you think this was something that the United States government system at the time, so their federal bureaucracies allowed almost. So we're talking about CIA, FBI, because you have a lot of experience with the FBI, and we're gonna get into that a little bit later. Not a lot, but you have good stories about them. Do you think they?
Allegedly.
Do you think that this was something that had to be almost allowed in those realms in our
Well,
government?
I mean, a lot of the video that was shown that day in real time shows that there was complicity on behalf of individuals. Now, whether that complicity was organizationally based, whether this unit of law enforcement collectively said this is what we're going to do, I don't believe that is what happened.
Hmm.
But you have individuals within those organizations that agreed with what the folks that were committing the sedition, which is what it was.
Yeah.
Let people understand that that's what it was.
Mm.
Were complicit. I
Yeah.
don't think that agency wise that this agency and that agency said, okay, this is what we're going to orchestrate. This is what we're going to do. But folks within those organizations who had the ability to allow it to happen, allowed it to happen.
Very well. I mean, I personally, to have my own personal opinion, I know this is not an interview of me, but I'm pretty sure they're complicit.
I mean, the evidence is there. We saw the complicity.
Yeah. All right. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this platform, but if you need more context, I can give you some. But moving on to question three here is a lot of individuals on social media platforms such as TikTok were using what happened at the United States Capitol and comparing that to what happened at the California State Capitol when the Black Panther Party for self-defense held a demonstration there. Can you explain more about what actually happened at the California State Capitol that day, and also explain how the situations differ?
Okay, we'll start with the end part.
Hmm.
There's absolutely no comparison in the two situations. It's like comparing ice and heat. I mean, they're at the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Hmm.
What occurred on January the 6th, per definition in the Constitution, was sedition,
Mm.
an organized attempt to disrupt a government function. I mean, that's what it was. The people that were involved were terrorists.
Mm.
The short answer for the difference in that and the gathering in Sacramento, nothing was done that was illegal.
Mm.
Absolutely, there was no violation of any statute or law whatsoever.
Mm.
So I mean, that's the basis of, like I said, to compare them is ludicrous.
Yeah. So one of the things that is reported to have happened during the California demonstration is what I'm going to call it. Was governor at the time Ronald Reagan, I believe, right? That was our California governor at the time.
Yeah.
He was holding a press briefing at the very same time on the lawn of the Capitol at the very same time that the Black Panther Party for self-defense arrived to hold their demonstration, right? And some people were saying that there was some intention there to cause some conflict with Ronald Reagan. By some people, I mean this is going back to the TikTok users, right? People with very limited information. Is this true?
That Ronald Reagan
Oh,
had intentions of creating a disturbance.
no, that the Black Panther Party for self defense had intentions on causing problems for Ronald Reagan, both physical and in the way of just disrupting his flow of government at the time.
Okay, think about that question
Yeah,
yourself.
I
So,
have.
so you have a group of black people
Mm.
whose intention it is to do harm to the governor of California. That doesn't even make sense.
No, not at all. We just need to make sure that gets dispersed. Because
No, that there was no intent to have a combative confrontation with anybody. There was legislation in the state as well as some hints of federal legislation that was going to severely limit the ability of certain groups of people to exercise their Second Amendment rights, period.
all right. And
Going into the building, going to the Capitol with non-concealed weapons was not a crime. There was no law that said you couldn't do that. There are laws that said you could not have a concealed weapon.
and
And just the thought of the party members there to create a combative situation. The name of the organization ends with for what?
self defense.
Yeah, self-defense is not aggression. It's defending oneself.
Yeah. And that brings me to today's state of California and legislation behind in the state of California, and a lot of those Second Amendment rights that Californians had at the time, when this demonstration took place, like he already mentioned, you weren't allowed to have concealed weapons on you, but you were allowed to open carry in California. Ronald Reagan and his and the other legislators at the time in California very vastly made it a race thing. And for a very long time, you will learn and you will see during our state that when they started to allow concealed carry weapons and getting permits for that, only white people were allowed to have them for the most part. And when African Americans went for it, they didn't give it to them. And you can see why they would want to do that, especially when you can see why, as a person, Ronald Reagan would want to want to do that in his way of thinking when it came to African Americans. I wanted to point to today's legislation, and there was a proposition that we all have something to vote. Well, we could have voted on if you're in California. I believe it was Proposition 15 when they brought it down to explain it to affirmative action. And what the proposition was saying, from my understanding, was that they wanted to be allowed to consider people's race, sexual orientation, and other things that may be discriminated against when writing legislation and bringing legislation forward. Um, do you remember? Do you remember hearing about this proposition and so forth?
Yeah, okay, just to go
Okay,
back a little
yeah.
bit. Okay, there was a time when what was identified or defined as equal opportunity and affirmative action did not exist. It wasn't written down that you must do these things.
Yeah.
Then legislation was passed that said you you cannot discriminate against folks for these reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And this most recent opportunity to vote was to reinstate that,
Mm.
so that you could not discriminate against an individual for any of those reasons. And the state of California, the voting population in the state of California said, no,
No.
it's just fine.
Yeah. Okay. And can
It's
you
fine.
do you
You don't
have
need to
in?
count those things. We
Yeah.
don't think everything is fine. And I said at the time that the legislation was defeated,
Mm.
the voting population of California was saying, yes, Black Lives Matter, but not quite that much.
Okay. So you answered my question. My question was going to be, how did that make you feel, and how did that look on the state of California, especially
Yeah.
when our legislators and other individuals are pushing and pushing in California with some of the biggest demonstrations of Black Lives Matter, for example, and all of these other individuals are saying, yes,
Right.
Black lives do matter, but yet they shot down that piece of legislation, and you already
Yeah.
answered that question ultimately.
Yeah. They matter up to a point.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I always like to have a conversation on. It always seems like in America, and no matter where you are, no matter what state you're in, is Black lives matter to a point, and then legislators, especially Republican legislators, always love to say, well, if you bring us policies, if you bring us laws, if you bring us etc., then we'll help you, we'll be there with you, we'll fight for you. And then every time that happens, it seems like it gets shot down. Is this something that is a reoccurring history of America, or is this something more so new, that the fact that Black people are even bringing legislation forward?
Well, I guess in a nutshell, the simplest answer is the fact that we even have to create legislative action to receive the rights that the founding document says we already have. I mean, tells you that something must be wrong.
Yeah.
That there's something that's hidden in between the lines somewhere, that we here in 2021, we are still asking for affirmative action, not to do something, but to not do something.
Yeah.
Don't discriminate against us. Not necessarily to put us ahead of or in front of, but just don't discriminate against us and anyone else who's included under the affirmative action umbrella.
Mm.
Just that is still being legislated is evidence in itself of what the intent is.
Yeah. I it's shocking to see, and I was very shocked to see our state pull that off. Um, so I'm gonna move to question 4 here, and now we're getting into the conversation about the FBI, more or less, as much as we can.
FBI. What exactly is that?
Some bureaucracy. So at one point in time, this FBI that we're talking about labeled the Black Panther Party for self-defense as public enemy #1. Can you explain how you felt at the time of hearing that, along with
Okay.
explaining what that actually meant for the party?
Okay. Well, firstly, it wasn't public enemy #1.
Mm.
It was the greatest threat to the national security.
Oh, so worse.
which, which historically America has gone to war with great threats to national security.
Hmm.
That's typically the appropriate response is war. So I guess basically the feeling was that whoever made that decision wasn't real smart. If we were in fact the largest threat to peace and freedom in the United States, that's a lot. And secondly, how did it make me feel? It made me and others feel that we must be succeeding.
Mm.
people must be understanding what we're really saying. People must really believe that what we're saying and doing is good or correct or appropriate. For someone to go, for an agency, a law enforcement agency, to go to that level to attempt to destroy generally means you must be doing something good.
Oh wow.
And then lastly, it let us know full well that United States law enforcement is coming for you.
Mm.
They just legitimized anything and everything they might want to do. Remember, this is the same agency that said Dr. King was an avowed active communist,
Mm.
that JFK was only a puppet for the Pope because of his Catholic religion. So, this organization has, for lack of better words, authored a lot of dumb stuff.
And- yeah, they coming after me next now. I let him say that on lives. But I mean, it is true. Yeah, they have a history of doing so. And I wanted, can you explain what were some of the things that they tried, if any, that are now public knowledge, that to discredit or bring, you know, in
Oh,
this.
murders. We'll
Okay.
start. We can start with murders,
Mm,
assassinations.
yeah.
You know, just sheer fabrications. I
Mm,
mean, again, how could one group of, as we were identified at that time, one group of Negroes who they knew who the majority of the functioning membership was, be the greatest threat to national security?
mm,
I mean, the two don't fit together. There were nations, let's say Russia, who really was kind of, we were in a Cold War
mm,
because we were afraid to have a hot war because that would mean destruction of everybody. But we, a group of folks that were really identifying and pointing out the rights that were defined in the Constitution and saying that we're part of that and we want to be included. How is that a danger? We
mm,
were attempting to defend and articulate what's the document said everyone is entitled to.
yeah.
So it's really a disheartening thing. But there were numerous things. I mean, when we had the breakfast programs, attempts to eliminate our sources of gathering food, just any number of things that could come to mind
Mm,
were all practiced.
yeah.
You know,
And it seems as if they were trying to build you all up to be anti United States 110% of the way. So
oh yeah.
they tried to bring you all down as much as they can. So like you said, assassinating leaders, and disrupting programs. You brought up the breakfast program. Can you explain a little bit more about what that program was, and what it is today, now that our government stole it from you all? If you want to explain that part too.
Well, it was an idea that children need a safe space in some communities where they can have a meal, have a study space, feel feel good about themselves. I mean, science says that it's hard to learn if you're hungry.
Mhm.
I think everyone agrees on that. So that was the premise that the breakfast program was built around. It grew to not just breakfast, but lunch and after school, a safe haven for students that lived in communities that weren't necessarily conducive to a good, happy life.
Mhm.
That morphed into or became the Head Start program as people know it now. But people don't know about that. There were other programs within communities where when seniors or people who needed medical attention or had medical appointments, they needed a way to get there. We provided that transportation. I mean, there were any number of things that never are spoken of
Mm-hmm.
that were community improvement activities. The one of the premises was we as a community, since we feel unrepresented, we'll say within law enforcement, we can provide that kind of policing activity in our own communities.
Mm-hmm.
We can do that for ourselves. If we realize that we can't, then we'll ask for help.
Okay.
But give us the opportunity. There are things within our community that we understand better than those who don't live in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted that opportunity to do that. You know, people, groups within the community that were not conducting themselves in a appropriate community fashion, not showing the love and care for their neighbors, were incentivized to not participate in such activity.
All right.
And again, it was it was the party was being too successful at solving community concerns
Mm.
that government agencies that were identified that were supposed to do that weren't doing. So we were viewed as a threat.
Mm.
If communities take care of themselves, then a lot of government bureaucracy there's no need for it. A lot of agencies don't need to exist if the community is providing these things for itself.
Oh wow. So it's almost as if the suffering of a particular community is in the benefit of the government.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
is there any areas in where we're seeing that today? I know right now many members of the Black Lives Matter organization, along with a separate organization that I can't remember the name of at the time, are calling for a defunding of the police and reallocating those funds to different resources. Is that something that is similar, or how does that differ?
Right. I mean, I see I don't I don't like the word defunding unless you say the whole thing like you just did.
Mm-hmm.
Reallocation is what I believe should be being called for.
Yes.
There are many things that we call law enforcement for that we should be calling other agencies. We should be calling mental health agencies, or we should be calling, sanitation organizations. There are a lot of things that our society has gotten to the point where they involve police in activities that police are not trained to do. So the defunding is a kind of an ambiguous word. If you ask law enforcement workers, they're all in favor of, yes, have somebody else do that. We don't want to do that. We don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But on that same vein, as we've discussed in the past, another foundational element of the movement, if you will, was that we didn't see ourselves represented in law enforcement or in many other areas of government.
Mm.
So part of the activity was for us to be visible in those positions, to be visible within those organizations. And now it seems that we've gotten to a point where we're angry at those who look like us that are involved in those agencies.
And you know, why do you think that is? Because I have a hypothesis, and from my own experiences, I can share that after you answer the question. But
Yeah.
why do you believe that that became the case of us being mad at the individuals that look like us in these agencies?
Well, one is that, and this is going to answer another question of yours that comes later, is somewhere we lost this trust, or I'll even say love, of each other.
Mm.
Somewhere along the line, that got completely lost. And we started viewing individuals that are employed by an organization as no longer being humans or no longer being black, but only being a policeman or only being a city council person. We forgot that no, they're the same thing that we are. That's just the job that they have.
Mm. Okay. Well, yeah. Just going based off my own experiences with law enforcement, especially where I grew up, being South Los Angeles, and a lot of the times I'll hear my brothers joke about it when I was growing up, and I hear my mom mention it, and they'll be like, well, the person you need to watch out the most for when getting pulled over by a cop, or in that case, is the one that look like you. Because there's no telling which way that's going to go. Either you're going to have somebody who's going to understand, or you're going to have somebody who's trying to prove something. And I think that's a lot of the time where where the line is blurred between profession and individuality. People typically the officers that I interacted with who were African American, I was lucky to always get individuals who were sympathetic and understanding, and actually grew up in the community. Luckily, that doesn't really happen very often, but I was lucky in those situations. Not that I was just going out and interacting with cops to interact with cops. And yeah, that's one thing that I noticed and have witnessed before, especially when it comes to my brother. It becomes this idea, more so of I am my job, and not that I'm a part of my job for the most part, especially in a lot of these individuals always having to overachieve, always having to be the best in everything that they do in the profession. I think that being driven to that point, because within that own profession there's a lot of racism that they're encountering between their higher ups and other individuals that are meant to be their colleagues. Um, it just leads them to this place of elitist or elitism. So when they're interacting with a everyday African American individual who is living a tough life, or in situations just prior to the systematic United States and the system United States put them in, the elitism is what that individual see, and not them as a person
Right.
either. So we're both viewing each other as a cop and an elite cop. So we don't have that communication. We don't have that interaction. The moment you start calling a African American cop brother, or if you instant that when they're interacting with you over a speeding ticket or anything, they think you're trying to get away from them. They think, oh, just because we're both black, you think you're gonna get away, and it's like, no, I'm trying to show you respect in the way that we used to show each other respect. And that was the case a lot of the times, interacting with
Mhm.
those officers and then those individuals when I had to. Um, so that's where I think it falls. We become so adapted to our situations as black people because we have to, and we always overachieve and continue to overachieve in those places. And then sometimes we forget ourselves and we forget the people that
Right.
look like us.
Right.
I
But it's not just that's not just an obstacle in terms of relationships between law enforcement and black folks, but we do the same thing to our politicians, to our elected officials. For some reason, we we use the example, and we discussed this in class many times. President Barack Obama was not the president of the black population of the United States. He was the president of the entire
United
United
States.
States. When you hear people say, well, he didn't do anything for black people, I beg to differ that he did a lot of things that, while not identified for black people, we certainly benefited by them.
Mhm.
I mean, the idea of folks to think that as president, you could single out any one group and say, okay, I'm going to help this group, means that I'm not going to help these other groups.
Mhm.
It's that kind of not proper thinking or slight of thought that causes us difficulties.
Mm. Oh, and hopefully throughout these years and more people pointing that out and pointing to that, we can get away from it. This brings us now to our question five here. So this is something that I notice a lot, and there's a lot of information about the Black Panther Party for self-defense, um, but it is not documented in the way I was taught when it comes from you, especially when I was looking up, the California state capitol, and that's why I worded the question differently and asked you what happened there, because the
Mhm.
way it was documented, I had to really, really dive in there to actually find the true evidence of what happened.
Right.
So given that most individuals are not as lucky as I was to have a conversation with a member of the Black Panther Party for self defense, and get the full stories themselves and have the time to research. Uh, do you ever wonder why our history books basically vilify or gloss over the Black Panther Party for self defense? And do you think there are going to be? Do you think that's going to be the same thing when it comes to the Black Lives Matter organization?
Okay, let me start here with that answer, and I can give you we talk about history.
Hmm.
Uh, Back in the early 90s, my son was doing a year abroad program at Kent University in Canterbury, England. So I was there, and one of the things that I had always wanted to do in terms of history is I wanted to read some historic information about the Revolutionary War, the War of American Independence versus England.
Hmm.
So I'm in Canterbury, England, in the library, and my quest is to find all of this great documentation about what we call the Revolutionary War. And the librarian came over to me and he said, you look like you're puzzled. Is there something you can't find? And I said, yeah, I'm going to find some accounts of the American Revolution in your history books. And he looked at me and said, well, sir, you understand we lost that battle. So we didn't write a lot about it. It was really America was this little new piece of our dominion and we lost it. So it wasn't a big deal. And I say that to say that when the way American history is written, if it were properly written, we would have no need for African history to be included
Mm.
in as a subject, as a standalone subject. American history would be history of everything that has transpired in the Americas, regardless to the ethnicity of the group that did it.
Mm.
You know, so because it was again the movement, and I'll have to say this again, understand a movement is a movement. It's always going on. Movement is constant.
Mm.
Basic physics.
Yeah.
Motion is motion is motion is motion. So it never ends. Do I think BLM will be glossed over? Obviously not, because the people who write history look like a lot of the people that you saw involved in the activities.
Yeah.
So, and history, to be fair though, history is recorded differently now than it was in the past.
Mm.
You know, history is recorded instantaneously now. When something happens, everybody knows it happened real time. And they carry the message. We're not a society or a culture that's dependent anymore on reading in a book or reading in a newspaper what happened.
Mhm.
People see it as it happens. So no, it won't be glossed over. History has to gloss over a lot of activities that took place during that portion of the movement because the country's reaction or the powers to be reaction was wrong. you know, to deny people rights that are guaranteed to them, to physically abuse people is wrong. You don't want people to know that you did that. Not if you're the greatest nation in the world. The fact that you fought wars based on other countries' treatment of their people and the way you treat your citizens is worse. You can't record that.
Mm.
So I mean, not just things that the party did are glossed over, but most things that were involved again in that portion of the movement, the inside or the underlying purposes of them is glossed over because the country, the nation doesn't want to admit that it did really bad, wrong, awful stuff to its own.
All right. Yeah, I felt that it had to be a time period thing for the most part in history. As you were saying, the documentation of history is always going to revolve around its time period and its time frame. You know, we are just
And who wrote it,
and who
and
wrote
who's
it.
writing
Yeah.
it.
Who came out on top, who didn't, and that's always going to depend. All right.
Right.
So this brings us to question 6. During the summer of 2020, there were many civil rights demonstrations across the United States. How do you feel seeing these demonstrations take place, and also how did it make you feel seeing the country's response?
I guess the best answer is I'll preface it by saying, remember, the movement is a movement.
Mm.
So it keeps going until resolve happens. So I was happy to see that level of the movement again, to where people were willing to stand up and risk their lives,
Hmm.
basically, for a purpose of betterment of our society. I think that's very that important. Again, to paraphrase something that Dr. King said, you don't really know that you're alive until you find something that you'll die for.
Mm.
That's when you know you're alive. And if you won't die for something, I don't know whether you ought to be around. If you don't have a passion for something,
Yeah.
I don't think you're really experiencing life. So to see people willing to put themselves in harm's way, who didn't really appear to need to put themselves in harm's way,
Mm.
I think that's what we're supposed to do. I remind people all the time that during my most active involvement in the movement, we'll use the Selma marches as an example. Folks are marching to get the right to vote,
Mm.
that is guaranteed by, again, the founding documents. At that time, voting age was 21. I was 19.
Oh, wow.
So I had decided that it was important enough to put my life on the line for something I couldn't even do.
Mm.
And I don't say that in a braggadocious way. I'm just saying, when you find something that's worth dying for, that makes all the difference in the way your willingness to be involved.
Mm.
If you feel that it's that important that people vote, even though I can't, I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to ensure that they get that opportunity.
Mm. That see that's one of the things that individuals point to a lot. And during your time growing up, it was a lot different. So a lot different. One of the things that I see a lot on when it comes to TikTok, it TikTok is where everyone is getting this information from. They're sharing all of these different videos. People are on there who have their degrees, and then there's other individuals who are just regurgitating what they learned in class. And you can tell the difference between those individuals. But one of the things that it talks about a lot is you can sign up to join the military, or you can be forced to join the military before you can even buy yourself an alcoholic beverage, like and
Right.
drink. But for you, that gap was a lot different, and and your generation is actually the generation that made it even possible for us to be voting at 18. And and the
And the and the first thing that my generation did after we got the voting age lowered
mm,
was eliminate the draft.
yep. And
Yeah, that was the very next step, because just a short story. There was a guy who I grew up with. I guess I know we went to elementary school from like the fourth grade through the eighth grade, and we went to high school together. And 2 weeks after we graduated from high school, he was drafted into the Marine Corps. That was been in June, and in January of the following year, I went to his funeral.
oh wow,
So he never got to be 21.
wow.
So he died fighting to defend a democracy that he, by law, had no voice
Mm,
in. Think about that.
yeah.
You're required to go and fight and perhaps lose your life to defend some laws and rules that you have absolutely no say in.
Mm. And that would explain a reason why a lot of individuals like yourself were fighting for individuals that look like you to be able to vote and lower that voting age because it is important for you to be able to participate in democracy in a democracy which would also require you to die for it. and
We,
and
we thought so. Yeah,
yeah.
we felt that that was a reasonable request.
Yeah, and I do too. And that is why that is a lot different than being able to drink, because there was a lot more important things happening
Yeah, yeah,
in
exactly.
the context. But another thing that you all did was you got a president to quit. Can you explain how you went about
Well,
getting the president of the United States to quit? Your generation did that.
well, there was a lot of us. And again, it was similar to the BLM activities, because it wasn't just black folks, it wasn't just brown folks, it was a generation. And let me give you just a little quick background on the psyche of that generation.
Mhm.
Okay, from I guess maybe about the age of 9 or 10 years old, the United States was involved in this Cold War
Mm.
with Russia. The bottom line of that Cold War was there was the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Both sides have this terrible destructive weapon. So the students, young people in school, on the fourth Friday of every month at 10 o'clock, we had what was called a civil defense exercise, where this siren would go off and students were required to get on the floor under their desk to protect themselves from a possible nuclear attack.
Mm.
Okay. So from age 9 or 10 to say 13 or 14, every fourth Friday of the month, you're reminded that life can be over any time.
Mm.
Life can be over at any moment, because we had studied about the results of nuclear attacks on in Japan. So when you're taught at that young age that life can leave you at any moment and you have no control over it, it starts something to happen inside your psyche that,
Mm.
okay, I can't wait for things to happen. I have to make things happen. So you live through that. And I can remember at the beginning of my senior year, no, my junior year in high school, when you think you're at your apex, you're about to leave high school soon and be able to change the world. The headlines in the newspapers said that based on some activity in Cuba, that we were going to have this doggone war again and that everybody was going to die.
Oh wow.
Okay, you put those together, and then you're out of high school and you're considered an adult, and people want to draft you and send you someplace else where you can die again. So since you were 8 or 9 years old, the threat of death being imminent forms your mindset. And this was not just in America. This was across the world,
Mm.
where you had a huge contingent of people who said, okay, change is necessary and it needs to change today because the bomb might come tomorrow. So that forced, people in a similar age all across the world to be like-minded on certain subjects. And there was no internet, there was no real communication between a group of 18, 19, 20-year-olds in Los Angeles versus a group of the similar age in Paris, but that mindset was there somehow. So it was easy to come together and make things happen with the idea that, no, this must happen today. So to get back to your question, there were things that Nixon was responsible for that now that we can vote, it's enough of us to say, okay, you can either resign or get fired. What you're doing is wrong.
Mhm.
Everybody knows it's wrong. So leave. And but the power of a large voting vocal population is what was able to make that happen.
Mhm. All right. And in question 8 is more so about today's and today's struggles. Um, in your opinion, what is the most dire situation that the African American community needs to combat in today's day and age? And do you have any suggestions on how to do so?
I think in my mind and in my heart, the most dire thing, the thing we need to fix the most is we have to stop killing each other.
Mm.
And you've heard me say this many times. When a black person dies and the person who is responsible for that death is white or has on a blue uniform, we demonstrate, protest, raise hell all the time.
Mm.
But when the person across the street, the 17-year-old across the street, or the 80-year-old innocent person across the street is murdered by someone who looks like them due to some gang activity, we don't even bat an eye.
Mm.
I think that's as a group, as a race of people, as a part of this culture, I think that's the thing that is doing us the most harm, because it gives the appearance, and not just the appearance, it's an example of we don't care about each other. Well, if we don't care about each other, not that we should have to demand that other people care about us, but it makes it kind of hard to have empathy, because we appear to only be angry when somebody else kills one of us.
Mm.
And with that, I mean, there's a whole lot of other family things that I think are what we need to do. We need to stop depending on other people to fix our problems
Mm-hmm.
and work on fixing them ourselves. I think we're more than capable of fixing them, but I don't know where the disconnect happened. And it's not really important where it happened or when it happened. It's important that we fix it, that we recognize it and fix it. And firstly, start showing that love
Mm.
for each other as a people, rather than, we used to talk about it in class, that crab in the barrel thing, that that's insane that that's assigned to us.
Yeah.
That we won't push each other up, that we more readily enjoy pulling each other down.
Mm.
That's insane. But I think that's the most important thing that we need to do is recognize who we are and recognize what we are and treat each other that way. And then we can come together. People have asked on many occasions in interviews and what have you that, well, how did you happen to join the movement? I didn't join. It was there. It wasn't like you filled out an application and requested membership. It was, I'm a human, I'm a man, and these things that are being done to me are wrong. I need to make them stop, and I need to make them stop now. I don't need to make them stop in 10 years, in 20 years. They need to stop immediately. How can I assist them? Or how can I make them stop immediately?
Mm.
And it kind of goes back to what I said before. Once you develop a passion for something that becomes more important to you than just your life, but for things that are beyond you, it's hard to stop a movement of people that are of that mind,
Mm.
that are willing to say, okay, I mean, I can remember on numerous occasions doing voter registration and marching in the rural South, that the feeling when getting on a bus or the feeling when driving through certain parts of the country was, okay, this is probably going to be the last time I drink a soda, or this is probably going to be the last time I see a sunset, but it's worth it. If
Mm.
that's the way it has to be to make it better, then so be it. I'm just one life. If loss of mind can improve that of those who are not yet born, okay, I'm good with that.
Mm.
And if you're only 19 or 20, the idea of death is something that you really don't process.
Yeah.
You're invincible. Particularly, you're invincible if you're right.
Hmm.
If you're right, nothing can harm you.
Yeah. Yeah, I go through that sometimes. Just if I'm right, I just get focused on that and and progressing towards that. So, you know, it it wouldn't be a stretch um, to say implementing things community wide and community based, especially in the African American community, with individuals who are in that community that looks like that community, that embodies what that community is, not just being African American but being a part of that actual community and combating and coming together with the resources necessary to bring in a new state of mind especially when it comes to games, and making that mindset less of a necessity. People always say it, "Oh, I'm only in a game, or I only joined because I needed to be safe." And combating that as a community seems like a place to start, right? It
Right.
seems like a place to go and to move towards. Um, and I guess that can be that's your suggestion to us, right? Is to move to a place of love and helping the community with the resources that we have already, and finding ways to bring in more, correct?
Right, right. And if you think about it, there's some things that have become built into our culture that I think we're the only ethnic group that measures our success by how much you distance yourself from where you started,
Mm.
in terms of, you'll hear people having a conversation and they'll say, well, where is Tyler now? He's all the way in Sacramento,
Mm.
so he must be doing well.
Yeah.
Where is this person now? Well, he or she is now living in New York. They must be doing well.
Hmm.
I don't know why we so adamantly attach success to the distance between where you started and where you are. We need to maintain those resources within the communities that we came from. and not be so desperate to put where we came from behind us. If we feel that it's not appropriate or not at the level or the standards that it should be, then I think we have an obligation to use our expertise within that community to bring it to the status that we believe it ought to be at.
Yeah.
Not leave it and point back at say, oh, look at what goes on over there. I think that again, it's mostly self things. And when I say self, I mean, say that pejoratively, all of us, that we need to recognize and understand that in a lot of instances, we are our own worst enemy.
Mm.
We create circumstances and situations within our community that we like to point at people not in our community and say it's their fault. But, I wonder sometimes, if I'm a Crip or if I'm a Blood and I kill somebody, did the white man really make me do that?
Yeah.
Or am I responsible for that?
Mm-hmm. Just more community-based organization and community. One of the things that I will mention is I during my time in high school and during my time when I was down there in LA and when I come back to LA, I hope I don't have to continue to view it, but there's a lot of community-based organizations. A lot of them are very separate from one another and always strive to explain how separate they are from the last or the next instead of coming together as unifying and still touching on the same topics but in different ways. We have gain interventionists in South Los Angeles. Sorry, we have gain interventionists in South Los Angeles that have been doing wonderful things, and there has been people in South Los Angeles doing that for many years already, who are not always a part of a grid, for example, who. But they're always driving a division between the two. you know I just personally from my experiences, the more we can come together community based as community organizations and extending that love to one another, that is going to reflect overall in the community. And one of the reasons why I believe South Los Angeles to continue to kind of be stagnant in that we're building slowly, but then as soon as we start to build in one way, there's always some division within the organizations that brings it back to being at a stagnant place where we're just happy with it. Um,
That's not new.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's been that way for years.
that's not new.
It,
But it if we want to change,
mhm,
that change has to begin within us.
yeah.
It has to, and it's difficult. I mean, we talk about, a lot of times you hear people talk about, well, the system has to change. The system is wrong. The system is this. The system is that. If you go back to where we started talking about those guys that were sitting in that room creating the foundational document for this experiment in democracy that the United States was, again, they were only talking about the people in that room.
Hmm.
They weren't talking about anyone that wasn't in that room. So the system that they designed is working exactly as it was created to work.
Mm.
It's working optimally. It's separating people. It has classism. It has all of those negative things built into it, but that's what it was built for. you know, that's the way it was supposed to function. You and I and the other class members have spoken about it a lot of times. We say that we are all avowed capitalists. Well, the only way capitalism can work is if you have a group to exploit.
Yeah.
If you don't have a group that you can exploit, then it's another economic system. It's not capitalism.
Hmm.
because you have to have the ability to have basically free or low cost labor to create a product to sell for maximum dollars.
Yeah.
And the only way you do that is have a group of somethings that you can exploit.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
know, there was a quote, not a quote, but a soundbite from one of the terrorists that occupied the U.S. Capitol, and they stuck a microphone in front of him when he was coming out, and the question was kind of like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you guys doing this?" And his response was, "This is a white terrorist sedition person says we built this. Listen, he believes that Caucasian Americans built the building. We all know who physically built the building,
yeah.
but he believes that he did. His ethnicity of people did.
Hmm.
You know, and that points out, there's nothing more dangerous than like ignorance.
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of that going around.
Yeah. And when I say ignorance, I just mean lack of knowledge, lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Not that it's a plus or a minus, but if you don't understand something or if you have misinformation, it can lead you in all sorts of nefarious directions.
Yes.
Those he felt that that building was constructed by white Americans.
Mm.
And I would venture to say that during the from mid 1700s through the 1800s, I don't know if there was any physical structure that wasn't built by slaves.
I don't
It
think
would
there
be
were
dumb.
either.
Yeah, it would be silly for it to not have been by the property that you have.
Hmm.
But it's those that kind of misinformation that fuels innumerable misconceptions.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that I wasn't going to talk about, but since we're on the topic of just building up our communities and being community based, um, in California, there we have had Maxine Waters serving longer than at this point in time, right? Longer than any other Congress, House of Representatives member in our history. So and that's not only a historical feat and something that I believe we should be proud of as a community, but and by as a community, I mean as African American individuals. But something that happened was she had someone running against her. If you're familiar, it was, I believe, Joe Collins was his name.
Yeah,
Who
poor fellow.
that yeah. I wanted to talk about just a little bit on the topic of his entire campaign from my what I witnessed from way up here in Sacramento. So I was trying to be neutral and look at it from way up here in Sacramento. Um, his entire platform was just don't vote for her because things been same for years and she's been serving for all those years. I can't think of any legislation he thought of bringing forward or that he said he was going to bring forward. If I'm wrong, if you supported him, you can let me know now. But I don't think he brought any legislation forward. His entire campaign was just, she's been in office way too long. Let me take over. Is that the kind of community progress we're looking for? Are we looking for that kind of community progress? Or what do you
No,
mean when you're talking
yeah,
about community progress?
yeah, no, that's definitely not an example of not even community, let alone community progress. When
Hmm.
your campaign is purely based on that person has had the job too long. You know?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's no. I guess at the heart of community progress is the community taking on responsibility for itself, for improving itself. Uh, Simple things that can change a community. I mean, taking care of your property, taking care of the people within the community.
Hmm.
You know, those really, really kind of simple things. I had a conversation with a group of students a few weeks ago, and their feeling was that everyone that lived in what's described as the community of Watts was poor.
Yeah.
That was their statement. But as we discussed it, I said, okay, poor. How do you define that? And they had some definition. And my addition to the communication was, okay, but everybody has at least a 60-inch flat screen TV in their house. They have a vehicle that's less than 5 years old. They have $200 worth of shoes on everybody in the house, from the baby who's 3 months old to the grandpa who's 60, 70, 80 years old. How is that evidence of being poor? It's again a misunderstanding
Hmm.
of poverty.
Yeah.
So, but if you believe that you are of an underclass, if you're convinced of that, then it's more difficult for you to accept the fact that no, I'm not what those other people say I am.
Hmm.
I I, I am their equal,
Yeah.
and we don't enunciate the positives within a community,
Hmm.
but we go along with the grouping. You've said several times South Los Angeles. Well, the high school that I attended was on 71st and Hoover, which is now called South Central or South Los Angeles. At the time that I was in school there, that was called Southwest Los Angeles.
Mm.
I understand that we have earthquakes here, but I didn't realize that we had earthquakes sufficient to change the geographical location of parts of the city. I didn't know it was that severe. But again, that kind of thing that happens,
Yeah.
where we allow outside community folks, agencies to define what we are.
Yeah.
You we have to define those things for ourselves.
Hmm.
And we have to understand that there are more important things than the individual. If
Yeah.
we're trying to change systemic issues, then they are by nature systemic issues. It's not whether you and I get along, but what's best for us as a group. Be
Hmm.
that group the be that group the people that live on this block, be that group the people that live in this housing project, or be that all of us as Black folks in North America.
Hmm.
But we have to combine everything. People in a common situation have to come together, because this system has gotten to a point where a lot of the wrongs are not racially based anymore. It's become a classist thing,
Hmm.
where if your economic status is at this level, this is what's available to you, nothing else, nothing more. And that's a dangerous precipice to be on, to where it's purely a class issue, because there are constraints, there are things. When you were in high school, I know you had plans for a future, but you didn't necessarily know how you were going to get there.
Yeah.
You knew where you wanted to go, where
Hmm.
you wanted to be, but you didn't specifically know, okay, I'm going to go up this street and turn left, and then I'm going to go over here and turn right, and then I'm going to go. You didn't know that.
Yeah.
But there were folks that were around you who had experience and were willing to say, well, no, you don't need to. If you turn left at that corner, you're going to go off a cliff.
Hmm.
Go down 2 blocks and then turn right. And I don't think that happens enough within our community, and it's for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
We haven't built the trust, or we haven't. There's a lot of contributing factors to that, but it kind of goes back to where we were before. Those are the things that we need to do if we sincerely want to make a change. If we
Hmm.
want to change the order of things, change the way our community is viewed, and change the way we participate in our community. And definitely, you don't campaign based on, well, Tyler's had the job a long time.
Yeah. And and that was my thing to everyone. I live stream, and usually when I live stream I'm playing video games, but I'm having real conversations, and that's one thing that I extend to people. Just because you see me sitting here playing a video game doesn't mean that I don't have knowledge. And one of the things that and one of the things that I said while I was playing video games was, if you voted for Joe Collins, you need to understand you didn't vote for progress. Everyone's saying, "Oh, I wanted something different." You didn't vote for progress. You might have even voted to take 2 steps back, because the ideology that this man was following was a clear indication of being easily manipulated by outside sources. And to even further that point, he was running as a Republican individual. And
Right.
typically, as African American Republicans, typically, not all of them, right? Because I can name a plethora of individuals after Reconstruction who were senators who were Republican, and they were proving the this new narrative that we have on these Republicans completely wrong. But easily influenced by their surrounding partners and party members, and voting very much against their own people's and individuals' beliefs. And that's one thing that I extended it to people was Maxine Waters, even though she's been serving for a really long time, and it's coming to the point where it's like, okay, we do need someone to replace her. We should be thinking about that in our community, but it doesn't have to be the first face that shows up, and it never
Right.
has to be the first face that shows up. And if you're voting for someone that runs purely off of, you've been having the job way too long, that's not progress. I can guarantee you they don't know half of what they're talking about, if they are talking about policies, and when they do know what they're talking about, it's going to be against your individual and community as a whole. For the most part, not all the time, but for the most part, it's going to be against your individual and your community ideology and what you need. And that's just where I fall, and that's where I fell when it came to him. So I'm
Right.
glad that we didn't have to see that happen to
Right.
our
But I
community.
mean, you mentioned people following what's perceived as a party line. I mean, we have evidence now of Republicans now who are suddenly elected Republican officials who are now adamantly voicing their dissatisfaction with the things that the previous president did. Well, you didn't feel like this when he was the boss. You just started feeling like this today. That evidence that you know now they're willing to speak, but when that was important that they spoke, they didn't speak.
Hmm.
Those are the kind of folks. I mean, Republicans and Democrats, that's not the issue.
Yep.
It's the individuals that are in those positions and what they're willing to do. If they're willing to, if we have elected you and you are not responsive to our concerns, then we need to figure out a way, like we did with Nixon, for you to quit.
Yes.
You don't need to have that job,
Hmm.
and and that that's not understood. We haven't taken grasp of that.
Yeah.
We tend to, and not just us as a people, but as Americans, we tend to only get excited about national elections.
Hmm.
We don't vote for the alderman or the council person or where we live. We vote for maybe the governor, maybe, and the president. Well, it starts way before
Yeah.
that. It's it starts with who should be in charge of our block club.
Hmm.
Who do we want that to be? Then who do we want to be in charge of a larger area?
Yeah.
And build on that to get like-minded people in positions of decision making.
Hmm.
But we have to do that. But I mean, it's coming, hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
But again, my fallback is always people got to be willing to put in the time to put, because it's not easy. It's by no means easy
No, no,
to
not at all.
change a system that is working perfect.
Hmm. Doing what it's intended to do.
Yet defined by those who created it. What do you mean it's broken? No, it's not broken. It's working absolutely fine.
Yeah. I I think we we have discussed a lot of these, but maybe if you can kind of put them in a list form, but um, given your extensive career in civil rights activism, you understand better than most that tactics need to change, and as your tactics change, it's also important to note the little issues and tackle those on all at once. So, what are some of the little issues right now affecting the African American community that are being glossed over as a whole that we should be tackling on?
Okay. I think one that's really glaring, and I'm more familiar with it as it's happening in Los Angeles County or in the state of California. I think we're now have an opportunity to change the educational system
Mm-hmm.
to really identify how it has in many areas has become a miseducation system,
Mm-hmm.
and the eyes of the country are looking at that now and are receptive to change. Just I'll use the example. The last day that students were on campus at your alma mater, your high school, was March 12th last year.
Oh wow.
It'll be a year in a month, and we still have students who don't have proper technology
Mm-hmm.
to attend their classes daily. We have parent meetings via Zoom for inviting the African American parents, and we'll have two or three parents show up at this virtual meeting.
Mm.
The excuse when they were on campus meetings was typically, well, I have to work at that time. Well, your job is closed now.
Yeah.
You're at home. We know you have a computer in your house because we brought one there. Why are you not involved in this activity? So I think the education component is, and I call it a little one because it's an easy fix. You can make demands right now on the school district to do things or provide things for your child as a student, and they will respond.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're taking full advantage of that, because I mean that education component is how everything else changes.
Yes.
So it's a little one that takes minimal effort, but it can change a huge system. It can have a huge system impact. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that's probably the key. The other one, and not to be redundant, but we got to treat each other better,
Mm-hmm.
and that's easy.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything easier than treating someone like they're a human. I don't think that's if you believe that that's something that's beyond your scope, then perhaps you should relocate to another life source. If treating people like humans is beyond you, then maybe you're better suited for somewhere else.
Yeah. Another life source. I love that one. um, yeah. So one of the questions that I think is dire and important, especially in these trying times and during this day and age, is what are individuals who are? Well, I probably have the question here. I think I skipped over it, and I apologize for that. Um, sorry. I thought I had it written down, but for individuals who are non-African American, are part of another minority group, are just are who are white in general, what are some of the things that they can be doing that if anything, right, that they can be doing that is impactful and helpful right now to the African American community?
Okay. Let me preface that my response to that with where I started.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in this struggle in this battle, in this movement, so that you can call me an American, so that I can be treated as an American,
Mhm.
not with a hyphen, but as an American. And I think that what Americans can do is recognize that without the contributions of all of us, this place wouldn't be here. Some of those contributions weren't real nice, but they were part of creating this thing, this place that we populate.
Yeah.
So in terms of what can non-black or people of African descent, what can they do to help? Rather than ask, they can read, they can educate themselves,
Yeah.
and they can understand that being pro-black does not mean being anti-white.
Mm.
Those are two exclusionary things. Because I'm pro-black doesn't mean I'm anti-white. It just means I'm pro-black
Yeah.
because I happen to be that. And you should be pro-white if you want to call it that, and
Mhm.
not anti anything. Everybody be pro-human,
Yeah.
because that's what that means. So yeah, I think that's what people should. Let's rewrite American history and make it inclusive.
Mhm.
Let's put everything in it that happened and celebrate everyone who made those contributions. It's appalling that here we are again in African American History Month
Yes.
or Black History Month.
Mm.
And some of my students asked recently, well, mid-month, mid-January, when we were talking about what was coming up, and their question or concern was, why is it just a month?
Yep.
Why can't they, aren't there enough contributing African Americans in the history of America that we could talk about? You know, we we talked about it just the other day. I challenged the students. I said, I want each of you to give me some quotes from speeches of Dr. King that are not from the I Have a Dream speech.
Mm.
You know? He gave a lot of other speeches,
Mhm.
but if you ask people to quote something, black or white, they're going to reference I Have a Dream.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of other things that he said. There's a lot of other very important and impactful black folks that have existed in the United States, other than the 5 or 6 or 10 that everybody knows.
Mhm.
It's important that our folks, as well as other folks, educate themselves in that area if they want to contribute. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. If we want to be successful.
So, if you are consider yourself to be an ally or to be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, a friend of Black people, however you word it for yourself, the biggest thing you need to do is educate yourself. And sometimes it will require a conversation if you don't fully understand the material, but that shouldn't be your first go-to. Your first go-to should be educating yourself,
Right.
because
If you're legitimately concerned,
yeah.
then you should educate yourself. That's and understand why the statement is Black Lives Matter. And it's not excluding other lives, but if you look at the history of this experiment in democracy that we live in,
Hmm.
at one time we were not considered people. We were chattel, we were property. That was the law of the land.
Hmm.
So our lives certainly did not matter because we were no more than a cow or horse or any other chattel.
Mm.
Then during the 50s and 60s, we began to declare, I am a man.
Mm.
That statement was saying, I am no longer chattel. I am a man.
Mm.
And that has now grown to where we have to remind folks, okay, my life matters because I am no longer chattel. I am a man. My life matters. Doesn't have a darn thing to do with whether your life matters, but it's just a reiteration of, okay, I have come from chattel to man, meaning human, meaning I'm a human. And now I'm reminding you, darn it, my life does matter. So stop treating it like chattel and something less than human.
Mm.
If people understand that, then just their understanding of that, I think, is a way that they can help. It's a thing they need to do.
Yeah. I see. So, I guess that answers this last question because I was going to ask what people can do in their everyday life. But for the most part, just having an understanding of that and educating yourself as much as you can on these topics and ideas is
Right,
really.
right. Understand first, accept that we are all, in fact, created equal, even though those who penned it really just meant the people in the room. But in reality, we are all created equal. If we believe that we were created,
Hmm.
then we certainly have to believe that we were created equal, that we weren't created for one to be subjugated to by the other, by another. And if we treat each other that way, or if we ask questions about things that we don't know and don't argue the answer. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is, if you ask me why I'm still concerned about slavery, don't debate me when I answer
Answer.
you. You know, don't tell me, well, you didn't do it. Yeah, but you benefited from it, so you did do it. You were complicit. You know, don't argue. If you sincerely want to understand, then don't argue with my responses. You know, those kind of simple things are what has to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and as I said, remind people understand this is a movement. It had a beginning and it is not even close to the end yet. Or we wouldn't be having this kind of conversations.
Yeah.
You know, it's a work in progress, as they say. There have been some major positive steps, and there have been some major backward steps.
Hmm.
I think that for the world to see what happened on January the 6th, and that it was led by the then leader of the free world,
Yeah.
that he incited folks to destroy and disrupt the democratic process. I think that was a step back and a little nudge forward because people got to see,
Mm.
wow.
Yeah.
And it raised a lot of questions that we don't need to even go into because, as you stated early, history still says that members of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense went to the state capitol to cause havoc.
Yeah.
It still says that.
Mm.
Believe me, if there had been any indication of havoc, we would have been dead.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Whether we were breaking any laws or not, lots of Black folks have died that were not breaking any law.
Yeah.
But
Well.
for history to look at it, to still report it that way, it just, is a reminder.
Mhm. Well, that was it for my questions that I had for you.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone in the live stream chat, if anybody has a question they want to ask, if you can ask it in this given amount of time, feel free to do so. I think these conversations are important. These are conversations that are going to be continuing to happen throughout all of Black History Month. So don't only find these ones and find mine, but try to go out and seek others. I think having firsthand experiences like Dr. Johnnie E. Rains here, the third, um, it really lends to that knowledge and that being able to piece all your history sources together to get the full picture and the full story is highly important. And we and one of the things that I was going to say that I really wanted to have this conversation is because we got to talk about solutions. We got to talk about implementing solutions. And then, yes, this is only from one mind here who has extensive experience and knowledge, but it's not the only mind saying it. And that's something important to note. So, any closing remarks for us, Dr. Rains?
Um, well, n- not really. Nothing more than we have to love ourselves.
Mm.
And again, I say that pejoratively. We have to love our people, and we have to be willing to unashamedly voice that we are one.
Yeah.
And we if we're not together, it's there's no way to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody in the house is still fighting with each other, we don't have a chance on changing what's outside the house.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a hard concept to accept, but I go back to, you have to have the passion and be willing to put your life, if necessary, in harm's way if you sincerely want systems to change. That's the only way it happens, is folks have to come together and be willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Not that they will have to make that sacrifice, but to be willing to put yourself in situations and circumstances that might be what it costs to change things. You know, when 2021, we're still, I think, the only, we'll say, civilized nation where we're asking for freedom. What the? Come on.
We really need to band together as an
Yeah,
entire society also as well, like he mentioned, gathering that education within yourself to view all of these different groups, not just Black people but just all marginalized groups, as
right,
much information as you can. I promise you it's not going to be too overbearing because it's necessary. Your brain would tell you it's necessary and you'll keep processing through it because we have to live it. So if we
right,
can live through it, you can read about it. Like,
right,
it's not that hard.
right.
But this is what a couple of people said. Brilliant mind. He's a goat. That means greatest of all time.
I
Other,
know what that
okay.
means.
I just don't want to. I don't want you to be finding people. I don't know what kind of connection you have. Someone else said, "Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Great interview." And that's just the love we're getting from the individuals that viewed it. This would also be shared on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure to give you that link, and as well as putting it up on our website, and I'll make sure to also give you that link. So thank you so much again, Dr. Rains. It was
Thanks for asking.
yeah, no problem.
You
Uh,
and the family be safe.
yes, yes, I appreciate you so much, and again, like I said, thank you. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
You have a
Take
great day.
care.
You too.
You too.
And that's just gonna be a blank screen for a little bit, but can I want to just thank you all for being here. I appreciate it so much. I know the screen is blank right now. I didn't add my webcam like I was meant to, so I'm sorry about that. Um, and that's why I wasn't showing up the entire time. But and I don't think I'm going to show up now. So I appreciate you all for being here. Thank you, and thank you. And please go out and seek that knowledge, that information, and gather those resources that are necessary. Appreciate you all. Love you all. Stay safe. be happy as best as you can, find what makes you happy, and find what drives you. Because like Dr. Rains, quoted from, well, didn't quote exactly, but paraphrase from Dr. King, you don't know what life is or what you're expecting from life if you haven't found what you're willing to die for. So I'm not saying you have to go out and die, but I'm saying you have to be willing to put your life on the line to experience this thing that we call life. So I thank you all again. Appreciate you and hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day. Stay safe and peace out.